Thank you all very much for coming this evening. My name is Charles Duggan. I'm the Heritage Officer here with Dublin City Council. And thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture by Mícheál Ó hAodha. Tonight's talk, The Diversity Within, Some Representations of Fairground Travellers and Showpeople in Irish Tradition, explores aspects of the diversity within Irish traveller history and culture, in particular Showpeople and Fairground people, their centrality to Irish fairs, and discusses how they are represented in Irish oral tradition. This lecture is the third in our 2026 series. Please take note on the screen of the next talk, which takes place in June, and scan the QR code for more information. And just to point out that that talk by Dr. Andrew Delaney will take place in 12 Henrietta Street, not here in the Quay venue. We take a break in July, and we'll be back in August for another series of 5 talks until November. So if you've missed any of our talks, you can watch them on our YouTube channel, which is called Dublin City Heritage, where you'll also find many other recordings on Dublin's built and cultural heritage that we have programmed over the years. And use the QR code there, basically to access it now if you wish, but don't listen to anything just now. And when you do, please like, share, and subscribe so that our recorded talks can reach a wider audience. And with this monthly lecture series, our aim is to amplify different voices, to share fresh perspectives on familiar stories, and to shed light on those that are less well known. We also seek to showcase new and innovative research that deepens our understanding of Dublin's architectural, cultural, and social history. This series is an initiative of the Dublin City Strategic Heritage Plan and is made possible through grant funding from the Heritage Council. I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to my colleague Abigail O'Reilly, who's Graduate Heritage Officer, for her work in helping to organise this series. And I'd also like to express my gratitude to Cormac Leonard and Sarah Garvey, who are providing Irish Sign Language services for us this evening, ensuring accessibility for all. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Mícheál Ó hAodha is a poet, writer and researcher from Galway, raised between the west of Ireland and the north of England. He is one of a small number of contemporary poets writing exclusively in Irish. He has published extensively in both Irish and English, with work that explores migration, memory, and the experiences of marginalised and minority communities. His poetry collections include Dúchas which was published in 2007, which has an introduction by Colin McCann, and Slán na hÉireann from 2012, and Lawer na Nashter from 2017, all of which engage deeply with the Irish migrant experience. Mícheál has also collaborated widely with traveller, Roma and Fairground communities and has written numerous books and articles across literary and cultural platforms. He is a regular contributor to Irish media, including TNG, RTE Radio na Gaeltachta, and leading literary journals. You can find out more about Mícheál's impressive work on his website, mícheálohadha.com. So for now, would you please join me in welcoming Mícheál to the podium? Thank you.
Yeah, Gura Míle Mágaí. Thanks a million, and thanks very much for inviting me, Charles, to talk about this topic. Geez, I don't know, can I follow that great introduction there? But anyway, I suppose because I was brought up speaking Irish in Galway, like I've sort of been exploring a lot of the Irish language sources in terms of oral history and history in general, and you get a very different picture, I suppose, particularly about travelling groups and about travelling show people and circus people. And I suppose just to say, I'll be focusing on the circus people more particularly in this talk, as opposed to the travelling road shows and fit-ups, the travelling theatres. But I suppose if you go back to Irish language sources, I suppose I don't want to start off with a problem, but there is a problem in Ireland in the sense that a lot of our history has been filtered through the colonizer sources. You know what I mean? They say the winner writes history, or history is written by the winners. So a lot of the time we're relying on English language sources to get any kind of background or sort of information about the different cultures that made up Ireland, the different groups, in particular travelling groups, because the British administrations didn't distinguish between general Irish and travelling groups. And they just referred to Irish that moved around as wild Irish, masterless Irish, wild women, wild men kind of thing. Tramps, gypsies, people of no abode, etc. Whereas when you go and look at the Irish language sources, they're much. There's a huge richness in there which hasn't been studied really much at all yet, because a lot of modern historians don't have Irish, I suppose. As I said, the sources are English quite a lot of the time. But if you go back to even any century in the Irish language, you find that there was a multitude of travelling groups moving around Ireland. You know what I mean? Travelling was normal. If you go back to even to the folk tales, there's barely one folktale that doesn't mention a traveller calling in, or a different type of traveller, and different travelling groups. And even we have references, even in the 20th century, to say Cant na Dáiliúirí Taistil, the language of travelling tailors. Bearlagar na Saor, the language of travelling stonemasons. The two languages which seem to have survived into the, and obviously Cant na Dinkéirí are, the language of travellers, formerly called tinkers quite often. And I suppose the other thing as well is this homogeneity wasn't ever acknowledged, by the historical sources, but neither by the government. It suited them. Like in 1963, when the Commission of Itinerancy report was issued, which was a kind of a very sort of defining report in relation to travelling people in Ireland, it was just claimed that everybody came from families that were formerly called tinkers. Do you know what I mean? And it didn't take into account that there was a huge number of occupational groups amongst travellers under Celtic society and under Celtic culture. Travelling buttermakers, travelling tailors, travelling herbalists, travelling showmen, travelling tinkers, travelling metalworkers, travelling, you name it, really. Unfortunately, a book came out there about maybe 6 or 7 years ago down in Limerick, actually, and it was based on the workhouse in Limerick. And you could read a kind of the British were very good, I suppose, on the census, fair play to them. They're very good as well about noting down everybody in a particular house, or, who has Irish, who has English, who can read, who can write, where their family might have emigrated to, etc. But, so they were very good for keeping records, in fairness, but it is noteworthy, say, in this particular book, which was from the late 1700s, that there was a description of every single person who was in the Limerick workhouse at the time. It was about 1790, maybe, around the time of various big rebellions abroad, etc., and here. And when you read through them, you realise actually 80 or 90% of the people are actually nomadic people. Do you know what I mean? Who've been kind of put into this system, which later became the institutionalised system, which, unfortunately, there was a lot of scandals associated with which we have heard a lot about in recent times, where basically the institutionalization of people who were not respected, or were hidden in society, or who they wanted to. And I suppose if you were to use a modern analogy, you could say, say when we won't say what countries they were from, but the people who invaded Iraq, say, when the first thing they went in there, the first thing they did actually was ID everybody, or try and ID them. Do you know what I mean? And that's the first thing, I suppose, a dominant power will do, is it wants to know who everybody is. Do you know what I mean? And then, of course, in Iraq, they discovered suddenly, oh, actually, a lot of people are Shia. They don't mix with the Sunnis, etc. There's all sorts of different tribes here. There's Christians here. There's, different religions, etc. Older religions that go back to the time of the Bible, etc. So anyway, just to mention that, I suppose, that there was a diversity there anyway, you know what I mean? But it suited them in 1963. The report of the Commission on Itinerancy was basically very biased in the sense of, let's settle everybody down. All the travelling people in Ireland, they're all the one. They're all descendants of people that we call tinkers, and they have no function in society now. They're no good to this developing economy that we're having here now. American money was being pumped in, kind of late 50s, etc. Sean Lemass, etc. 1963, the report came out, and of course, a lot of traveller families left Ireland at the time as well. But there was no nothing taken into account about the fact that probably the people who are classified as travellers today are actually an amalgam of a lot of different occupational groups in Celtic culture or Gaelic culture, you know. So Patrick Logan, I suppose he's written, just to get back to the show people or the fairground people, where the places they frequented, I suppose. He's described a very good book in the 1980s. He described the Irish fair as more than a marketplace. It was a travelling economic and social world that moved rhythmically across the country according to the seasons. Before the arrival of permanent shops, supermarkets and modern transport systems, fairs depended upon travelling or itinerant merchants and peddlers who travelled continuously from one fair to the next along well-established routes. These travelling traders formed an important mobile economy within rural Ireland. Among them were some of the things that I mentioned there earlier, but also cloth sellers, tinkers, metal workers, livestock dealers, horse traders, drovers, peddlers, carrying small wares, and various types of traders selling household goods from temporary stalls and carts. And there's also a lot of mentions in the Irish language, interestingly, about a culture which was kind of repressed, really, because when modern medicine came in, but about herbalists, you know what I mean? And we're only discovering kind of in modern times, you know, of course, all the modern medicines are actually based on traditional herbs anyway. And horse doctors, etc., also acrobats. And I suppose for many rural Irish people, especially those living in isolated districts, and Ireland was a very rural country, let's face it, before urbanisation, the arrival of the fair provided access to goods that could not normally be obtained nearby. In this sense, the fair functioned almost like a temporary, I suppose, Dunnes stores or whatever, assembled in the open streets and marketplaces of the town. Stalls sold everything from pots, pans, tinware tools, ropes, harnesses and utensils to clothing, boots, hats, tobacco, sweets and imported goods. So the fair transformed ordinary market towns into crowded centres of exchange where commerce, movement and social interaction was combined. I suppose we could also throw into fairs as well. There's a whole culture around holy wells and pilgrimages in Ireland as well, you know, in local areas where regularly it was like a mini fair. Do you know what I mean? It was both the sacred and the profane, I suppose, the commerce and also the secular world. And a lot of these fairs actually were based around monasteries as well, because monasteries were often the centre of a particular town or area, you know. So he argues as well, Logan, that fairs were the economic backbone of rural Ireland before the development of livestock marts and modern transport networks. Agricultural trade revolved around the annual fair calendar, and fairs became essential gathering points for buying and selling livestock and produce. Cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, donkeys, and occasionally goats filled the fair streets, while horse fairs, which travellers will be well aware of in places such as Ballinasloe, Spancil Hill, became particularly important both economically and socially.
Michael, apologies, could you just speak a little bit slower?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Alongside livestock, farmers traded butter, wool, flax, linen, oats, wheat, hay, turf, yarn, and homemade farm produce. So I suppose the other thing as well is many fairs also acted as kind of collection points or distribution points, really, for goods later exported to Britain, especially cattle, butter, wool, and then during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. So, and the other thing as well, which people kind of, Ireland has changed so much, I suppose, in such a small time, as compared with other countries anyway. But the fair represented one of the few moments when substantial cash, you know, entered many rural communities. It was the only time of the year, really. For small farmers, Fair Day might be one of the rare occasions in the year when significant money changed hands. So the fair therefore shaped not only trade, but the wider rhythm of rural life itself. And it brought together, I suppose, farmers, travelling traders, horse dealers, labourers, entertainers, and local families in a temporary but highly organised world of exchange and social activity. And until I suppose, relatively recent times, you know, a lot of traveller families circuited a relatively small area, you know, within a particular region. Do you know what I mean? And a certain amount of villages where they were known, etc. And I was talking to someone who's of Roma background the other day, and they said that, you know, it's the same even today, say, in parts of rural Romania, say that there are certain bars or pubs, like say, I think they're called Sarda, if I'm pronouncing that right, in Romany, where it's rural labourers, rural people, and gypsies or Roma who go to those pubs. Do you know what I mean? And who interact with each other. So the history of fairs and fairgrounds is deeply interwoven with the social, economic, and cultural development of Ireland and our close neighbour Britain, and indeed Europe itself. So from medieval times, charter fairs and livestock markets, down to the mechanised travelling amusement grounds of the 19th and 20th centuries, fairs evolved from centres of commerce into spaces of spectacle, I suppose, where they originally started out maybe as primarily focused on trade and licensed by the crown when we were colonised by Britain, our local lords, kind of our local chieftains, where merchants, farmers, craftsmen, and travellers gathered to trade goods and livestock. There's a famous book called Old London Fairs by Thomas Frost, which is from the late 1700s, I think. He describes how famous English fairs such as Bartholomew Fair, Southwark Fair, and Greenwich Fair, and Mitcham Fair, I saw there's some articles in the paper today about that, are major annual events drawing enormous crowds from both rural and urban communities. These fairs were initially connected to religious feast days and saints' festivals, which gave them a legitimacy and regularity within the calendar year. The fair was therefore both a place for the sacred and the profane, I suppose. So the emergence of travelling show people or fairground travellers as a distinct occupational identity, is one of the defining developments, I suppose, in fairground history. Show people developed highly specialised family trades connected to the rides, the amusements, the entertainments, the transport, acrobatics, and the theatre reviews or theatre shows as well. And also they were very important in terms of new inventions across Europe, not just in Ireland or Britain, but when you think of new inventions like steam, steam-powered vehicles, the cinema, a huge number of things that are crucial to modern culture. It was actually travelling show people who first kind of showed them, or first demonstrated new inventions such as them. Industrialisation transformed the fairground more radically than any previous historical development. During the 19th century, steam power revolutionised transport, engineering, and public entertainment. Steam-powered roundabouts and mechanical rides replaced many older amusements and introduced aspects such as movement, speed, lights, and noise on an unprecedented scale. The fairground became a symbol of modernity and technological wonder. So I suppose what happened in the 20th century in relation to fairs, and I'll get on to show people in a minute, the 20th century really just brought both expansion and decline to traditional travelling fairs. Mechanical rides became larger and more technologically complex, incorporating electricity, hydraulic systems, and increasingly dramatic motion. And also fairgrounds were competing with new forms of entertainment and new forms of visual culture, I suppose, cinemas, dance halls, amusement parks, and later television, of course, for public attention. And interestingly enough, the Irish government, it was quite even though people maybe laugh at it nowadays, but it was quite an idealistic scheme when we got independence at the time. They issued kind of questionnaires to the local educated people in villages, because they realised, I think, based on talking to scholars who came to Ireland from, Norway, from France, from Germany, etc., that cultural scholars, but also folklore scholars, that because we were an island, because we were very poor for a long time, because we were colonised, because we were cut off from the rest of Europe, a lot of aspects of culture had survived here, right into the 20th century. People were still telling stories going back to Boccaccio, and medieval times, in Connemara until very recently, So they issued these questionnaires, and one of them was called the Tinker Questionnaire. A lot of the questions in it wouldn't be anthropologically kind of sound or even PC by today's standards, But it was asking like local educated people, like the clergy, nuns, local teachers, etc., in every place, about different aspects of the local culture. So they issued questionnaires about herbalism, about beliefs about the rosary. You know what I mean? The rosary used to be said in different ways in every village. Beliefs around the American wake, where somebody was going away to America and they wouldn't see them again, so they had a wake about them. About many different aspects of Irish life. Some of the answers were interesting. They issued one about tinkers. To be honest with you, a lot of prejudice came back in terms of and a lot of kind of older sort of, because the teachers maybe were part of the emerging middle class, really. Even though they were supposed to go and ask the local people in their area, what they knew about travellers, what families visited their area, etc., what they worked at. There were a lot of stereotypes in it, you know what I mean? And a kind of a bias against them as well, because it was seen that they weren't part of the wage labour economy, which was, coming into Ireland. They were outside that to a large extent, and outside a lot of societal kind of, the GA, different aspects of local rural life. But anyway, so it's not surprising then that even in that Tinker questionnaire, there are very, very few references to Showpeople or Fairground people. It's incredible, really. And people knew very little about travellers in general, really, or about their language, or that there were different languages amongst them, etc. Parallelity amongst the Showpeople or Fairground people. And I could only find two sort of references to Fairground travellers even. One of them is from 1952. So one group, which I know has several branches under the surname of Hunter, one family of this name used to itinerate around Ballycastle district in North Antrim in the summer. Another family of this group used to visit fairs at which the man invited others to bind him. He undertook to untie himself. However this was done, he was usually called Tie the Boy. He also ate glass and ate fire. Another one is a respondent from Kilfinnan, County Limerick, described travellers who worked as showmen or trick-of-the-loop men as follows. Yet another departure, some have a stock of gambling games which they set up near the town or at sports and races. A table with squares marked feather, cross, star, diamond and anchor is produced. A dice cube is similarly marked. You bet on the squares by putting a penny down on what you fancy. Even if all the squares are covered, the odds are that such a penny remains in the operator, as the operator says, for the use of the board. There are wheels with numbers and cards to correspond at so much each, etc. Often some produce the old pack of cards. In the old 45, that was before 25, card playing, of course, has been revived all over Ireland in recent times, particularly in rural Ireland. In the old game of 45 played around this district, it is sometimes said when a man throws the 5 of trumps, the best card, best trump, rather cheaply or untimely, or in an untimely way away, you'd get that in Cahermee. This is an allusion to the great fair of Cahermee, the biggest horse fair in the south, and at one time the biggest in Ireland. Numbers of card sharpers or trick-of-the-loop men frequent that fair, not all of them tinkers either. So the only person really that I've seen, there have been a number of English show people who've written books about, or autobiographies about their lives, but the only one here in Ireland really is Pecker Dunn. He played with the Dubliners for a while. He was a very good singer and musician. And 2004, a book called Parley, Poet and Chanter, which I actually worked on with him. He says, he's talking about show people's cant or parlary. It is a lovely thing to know the cant, and it is a very old language. The poets used to use it in Ireland long ago. You take a name like Ward, a name that's very common among travellers. If you translated that into Irish, it would mean the son of the poet, Macon Ward. The poets used to travel around with the musicians, the tinkers, the stonemasons, and all the other different tradesmen in times gone by. And they all had their own cants and their own ways of disguising their words so that they could speak to one another privately. And they were proud of that. We travellers should be proud of our history and our language. I know that I am. So, I was just talking there about, okay, so travelling fairs and show people retained a strong cultural presence, especially in smaller towns, even as certain aspects of them declined in the 20th century with competition from cinema, TV, etc. And the arrival of the fair remained a major communal event. This is nowadays this is very evident when you go on holidays, say to somewhere like Spain or France. I have a sister married in France, and near Montpellier there, where the Gypsy Kings came from. And it's very noticeable when you go over there, say, that they have even different, I mean, they don't treat the travellers pretty well, very well or anything, but often a lot of départements, as they call them over there, have different camping grounds traditionally for the different groups. So the people who are Showpeople are Fairground people are called les forains, and they have their own place where they can park up, say, when they come. Usually related to maybe a festival or a pilgrimage or something like that, timed with that. The Manouche, the people who they're descended from Roma, people who probably came into France in the medieval times, and they're regarded as, I suppose, French travellers nowadays. They have their own place. And then the newer Roma who've come in, I don't know whether they have a place, to be honest with you, except on the outskirts of town. But I suppose sometimes we don't realise, often until somebody comes here to visit Ireland, I think, and they say, particularly somebody who's been here before, maybe 10, 20 years ago, and has come back for the first time, we don't realise that the pace of social change here has just been phenomenal, that sometimes aspects of culture and life have changed quicker in 5 and 10 years here than changed in, in Germany or France or even in England, sometimes in 30 years or 40 years, particularly as relating to, fairs and traditional kind of aspects of life such as that, I suppose. And I suppose as against that, say, the recent wisdom that we have in Ireland, say, is that if you're to read a lot of the newspapers over the last 10 years, because of various awful things that happened in our past and the dark aspects of it, you'd kind of think we were a bit of a cultural wasteland here, for virtually the whole of the 20th century, But that isn't true, I remember reading, when you think about it, like, say, and I'm relating this to this cultural aspect as well, like fairs and showgrounds and Showpeople and circuses. Some of the best writers in the world came from Ireland in the early 20th century. I remember reading years ago, or I didn't read it, I just looked at it in the library, but there was a book by a guy called Brian Fallon, who worked for the Irish Times, who was an art critic, a very highly renowned one. And he used to say that, some of the best art that was produced in Ireland in terms of painting and sculpture was produced kind of in the 1940s and 50s, etc. Whereas a lot of the time, we're kind of led to believe that was a blank. That era was, sure, there were a lot of bad things about that era as well. But, and the country was very poor, etc. And people were hidden away who we didn't like, kind of thing. So in terms of the circus, that's nothing new, really, within the Irish imaginary or within Irish culture. Celtic culture that preceded the worst excesses of the colonial project. We know for a fact, say, that the Gaelic chiefs of the past regularly hosted great entertainments such as the circus, encompassing the best jugglers, acrobats, animal trainers, and clowns. The Irish devotion to the horse has been well documented through history. So too our love of the clown, the trickster, the crazy fool, our hero, who tells us the truths we don't want to hear. So when you think of, say, Mad Sweeney, I think Seamus Heaney wrote a collection about him. Buile Sidna in Irish, it's the idea of the trickster was very strong in Ireland as well, as it is in other cultures as well, for instance in Africa. So the Irish fascination with the circus and its aura continued well into the 20th century, long after the rise of radio, television, expositions and zoos had begun to kind of, I suppose, pale the circus's luster in many Western countries. The other thing as well is many of the people who came into TV here in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, when you think of, say, actresses like Anna Manahan, Robert Carrickford, who was in Glenroe, a lot of them came out of the travelling show tradition, where they were travelling around with a travelling road show or theatre show, which often combined both kind of circus aspects and tricks, etc., and acrobatics, and a spectacle, and also and drama or theatre, the Lambert, Wonderly Wagon, that was on television. And I suppose one of the greatest novels written in the Irish language is called Dioraíocht or Exile by Pádraig Ó Conradh from Galway. And that's the story of an Irish migrant to England, a man who's it's possibly based on Robert Merrick, the Elephant Man, who was born severely disfigured, who actually had Irish roots as well. His mother was Quay, I think was her name. But he spends his life in the book working as a freak in a travelling show, and who recounts his most intimate thoughts and dreams. It is the mind of a man who's been rejected by the rest of society. And ironically, I suppose today you could say the whole issue of migrants is back again, the circle of life. It just shows that some questions or issues never really change. And an important thing about the circus as well is, say, people who worked as maybe freaks or, oddities in the circus, that lasted in America probably longer than it lasted in Europe. But, like say, the person called a midget or whatever it was. I remember seeing some posters after communism fell in Eastern Europe. And, there were references to so-and-so who's 25 centimeters tall, or, the midget man or whatever. But they were quickly kind of, realized then when they were coming into the West that that's not appropriate to... but it's important to recognize as well that, say, in a pre-kind of social welfare time, when people would starve, literally, if you didn't have an occupation, etc., and also just to stay out of some of these awful institutions that we've heard about in recent years, the circus actually provided, and travelling shows provided, a good, way of employment for people. Not ideal, obviously, but for people who didn't want to be institutionalized or who didn't want to be, Robert Merrick, I think the way that he, as I understand it anyway, I think it was John Hurt who played the part of him, the freak in that film, The Elephant Man, but he actually hired himself out initially, for people to stare at. And it was when upper middle class or upper class people started speaking to him through the kind of from behind the screen or whatever he was behind, that they realized, oh, actually this fella is very bright and he can have a very good conversation with me, etc. And then they started to kind of promote him and get him education, etc. So, but unfortunately at the start he had to hire himself out to be kind of stared at, etc. So I won't go into it now because I'm going over time, but they have, I suppose, Showpeople and Fairground travellers were often brought the first news of developing technologies to the remoter regions of countries which were on the cusp of change from the rural to the urban. One thinks of developments in steam and electricity and of the enormous role played by travelling performers, exhibitors and artists in the evolution of the most influential art form of the present era, I suppose, the advances in the transmission of the moving image or developments in cinema. So you have someone like Charlie Chaplin, way back of Irish stock, grew up in the East End of London from a circus family, and he ends up kind of just at the start, I think he didn't want to be in any talkies, do you know what I mean? But he ended up in the movie industry in America, in some of the silent films. So he kind of bridged that gap between the older culture and the newer one. And I suppose the other thing as well is the circus is a very international phenomenon. And the depth, diversity and internationalism of many of the circuses that graced Irish shores in the early 20th century would surprise a lot of people. For instance, this is just a description by a man who was a circus enthusiast in a small village in East Limerick. I got a lot of information from his relatives who are still involved with the circus. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, he just mentions, say, he writes into the editor of the World's Fair, which was the newspaper that was the show people and circus people's newspaper. So if you wanted a job, or if you wanted to advertise a job in your circus that was, say in the winter time and it was coming up the job in the summer, in France, in Germany, in England, etc., it was that organised. You'd put an ad in the World's Fair. And also they had reports on, say, all the different circuses and shows, very organised. So this man was writing from East Limerick in early 1900s. In years gone by, the little town of Capmora was visited yearly by all the tenting circuses, Batty's, Powell and Clark's, Ginnet's, Lloyd's, Transfield's, Cooney's, Keeley and Patterson's, Davis's, Hannaford's, Buff Bill's, Stevenson's, Duffy's, Scott's, Baker's, Poole and Bosco's, Chadwick's and Julian's. I can remember when a child of about 4 years seeing Powell and Clark Circus procession parading through the streets of Cabmore, and the march their band played was O'Donnell Laboo. So, of course, circus people were very smart as well. They were business people, and they would suss out with their advance men or agents who went ahead to put up the posters and to, market the circus that was coming in a few weeks or a few months' time. They'd suss out the lay of the land and find out in Ireland, say, that village, are they all Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or, Parnell or whoever, and don't sing a song that's in favour of such and such a guy, or such and such a politician, etc. And those few circuses mentioned there are just the British ones. Do you know what I mean? There were also circuses from Italy, from France, from Germany, etc. I want to just get on to two kind of aspects of, of circus and of travelling shows that haven't been discussed much. One is in terms of women's involvement, and the other one, the first circuses were prefaced on their animal acts, though. That's a fact. I mean, when they became entertainment shows, I suppose, in particular their equestrian displays and the animal shows that date back to the fairs of the Middle Ages. Some of the oldest prints and manuscripts, existent, depict representation of performing bears, cockerels and horses, in addition to acrobatic clowning. Nowadays with TikTok, I'm not a big social media person, but I can see what my kids say. You can see aspects of cultures from around the world that we could never see before, ironically, with TV and etc. And you'd see a lot of footage filmed yesterday in Romania or in Bulgaria or whatever. And, they still have, or in India, and they still have, performing bears, etc., etc., and aspects of culture that are very old, I suppose. Okay, so from its earliest beginning, circus had equestrianism and equestrian-related acts performed in the circus ring as its fulcrum, I suppose. Trick riding, bareback riding, various forms of dressage, and the presentation of horses is associated with diverse acrobatic and even comedic routines, often performed at speed by the riders while on horseback, have always been interspersed with amazing feats of balance and various juggling and tumbling routines. Although it has seen some change in recent times, given the difficulties relating to the exhibition, we won't get into all of that, rearing and training of animals for circus acts, the displays of the equestrians and their fellow artists are the glue that have always bound the entirety of the circus performance together. Okay, and I suppose some of that comes before, say, prior to the modern circus, you had a lot of exhibitions of menageries, animal menageries around Europe. So before they became more associated with acrobats, clowns, and theatrical spectacles, it was this display of exotic animals, really. And I have some pictures here of some of them that were displayed, or that went through Irish villages, in 100 years ago, and you wouldn't see them going through an Irish village now, They were a popular form of entertainment, and many circus families and travelling show families were the catalysts for both the development of these menageries and the later institution or evolution of the institution we know today as the zoo. So the history of animal menageries and circuses was, entwined from the very beginning. Menageries were semi-nomadic and travelled from place to place in the summer months, playing wherever large crowds gathered. Pubs, harvest festivals, communal or sporting festivals of one kind or another. As early as the 1830s, the British countryside witnessed the tour of an enormous menagerie entitled the Grand Zoological Exhibition, complete with a tent measuring 150 feet and which could hold 5,000 people. You know what I mean? So a huge crowd like. So I suppose these animal displays increased the commercial appeal of the circus. Travelling circuses relied on drawing large paying audiences, and exotic animals were a major attraction. Over time, some menageries became independent, etc. And I suppose a legacy of that is when you go to the circus, say still today, the children are asked at the end if they want to, have a ride on one of the horses or whatever, or go in the back, like to see some of the animals that are there, kind of. Okay. Another one is just another aspect of show people culture is, I suppose, it was quite a tough life, like very tough, really. It wasn't that everywhere they went, sometimes they went to places and particularly in the early 1900s, and people would be tanked up before they went into the show, not that people get tanked up today or anything, before they go to the show, but, on cheap kind of poaching and whatever. And of course, people's health wasn't as good. People weren't as robust that time either, so they'd often get, legless fairly quickly, kind of thing. Their nutrition wasn't as good either. So the circus people had to be tough when they went to different places, and there were incidents where circus people were killed as well. Like one man sang the wrong song, political song, down in Kerry, I think, famous clown called, I think it was Johnny Patterson, and he was actually murdered. Do you know what I mean? Somebody attacked him from the crowd. The other thing as well was, say, often circuses would have challenges, where somebody can come in and, try and ride a horse that's wild, or try and do boxing as well, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But often, somebody, if they were tanked up, would think, oh yeah, I could definitely do that. Do you know what I mean? And it was dangerous, I suppose. So this is from the early 1900s, and I probably shouldn't be saying it, seeing as I've travelled from Limerick, where I live today. But this is a description. We soon had a 100-foot tent with 2 sets of quarter poles set up. The tent was filled to the utmost. The people came miles in all sorts of vehicles, and some on horseback, on asses and on foot. They used to fight to get into the circus, and Jimmy Lloyd had to fight to keep them off. On one occasion during our second season, we got to Limerick and stood in the swamp field over the bridge. I'm pretty sure that's the same place where the circus pulls in today. On the way into Limerick, near when the police barracks was at the time, the circus was packed as usual. Lloyd let them in till the ring was covered with the people right up to the king pole. The people demanded a performance, but Lloyd could not clear the ring, so he uses his blackthorn stick, but all to no purpose. We had Biru, Ham and Bird, a trapeze act with us, so they were put on to start the programme. They worked their act on the king pole, and above them again was the iron ring with 24 or 25 flare lamps burning. After Bingham and Bird had done about 3 tricks, someone cut the lamp rope. Lamps, artistes and apparatus all came down together. The tent was in darkness and the audience stampeded out and cut their way out. But luckily, the lamps did not set fire to the tent. Then the fight started. Everybody wanted Lloyd's blood and their money back. Hugh and Jay Lloyd and myself had the takings and all the money in Lloyd's wagon. We had it all in a tin hat box and got away into the city safely. James Lloyd Sr. was taken and locked up in the police barracks for his own safety for the night. The Lloyds are still in Limerick, some of them, and the Clarks as well. Still travelling people, and they're still in Limerick. They settled there after coming over. Okay. I suppose two aspects of when a circus came to a rural area that were very important was, one was what they called the circus parade, where they would parade down through the street with a brass band to attract everybody to come along, kind of thing, and show off their various acts and the various animals that they have. And the other one was, there's a description in the same village in Limerick. It was quite a sight to behold. These were followed by elephants, clowns, this is the band now, cowboys and Indians on horseback, and the stars of the show, some on horseback, some in wagons, and the man on the high stilts. As he passed a pub, he would rest against the top window, and the owner would take great pleasure in handing him out a pint. Everyone expected eventually to see him fall off the stilts. Great traditions in the old days, due to so many drinks, but it never seemed to happen. He was as steady when he returned to the field, I bet he was, as when he left. Amongst the stars of the show there were 2, I recall, in particular, Captain Georgie Knight and Miss Amy Pillon. They did a double act and were experts on the high wire and as bareback horse riders. And I suppose on a more serious level, when we consider that the circus people did 2 shows a day, they worked really hard for their money, I suppose. And also that they travelled through the night a lot of the time, and very poor roads, very poor conditions, etc. Another one was, and I actually spoke to a man who, well, he was down on his luck for a while, let's put it like that, but he actually worked as a wild man for a while in a circus. This is kind of going back to the 50s, maybe 60s. He didn't want me to say to his wife, who was a settled person, that he'd actually done it, kind of thing, but he did. This is where people would pay to go in and look at a wild man, so-called, or a freak, kind of, in semi-darkness, kind of thing. And Pádraig O'Conor, that book I mentioned earlier called Exile, there's a very kind of poignant or sad scene in that, which is probably true actually, where He goes back to Galway, where he was from, after a good few years living over in London, kind of living in very run-down slums there. And he actually sees the girl he was going out with years earlier, who's actually quite well off, and she's now married and sort of with kids or whatever, and they're all very well dressed, etc. And they're at the circus, and she comes in and looks at him through the cage. You know what I mean? And she doesn't know it's him. Do you know that kind of way? But he realizes then, I'm actually an outsider forever now. Do you know what I mean? And I suppose he realizes that his life, I suppose Pádraig O'Conor, he was quite fond of the joch, so, he used to hang around with people on the margins quite a lot of the time. So, quick story about the wild man. In order to make him look the part, they got hold of a special dark dye, and with great enthusiasm set to work covering him from head to toe. He certainly looked the part, with a necklace of bones and dressed as one would expect a wild man to be clad, grass skirts, etc. He presented an awesome sight. When the circus arrived in town, they let it be known that a wild man was coming on the afternoon train and warned the public not to go near him. Needless to say, the station was crowded. With the cooperation of the railway people, the wild man was put in a goods wagon with his 2 attendants further up the line. When the train arrived, there was a great excitement deliberately created by shouts from the circus men who had brought a cage on a flat wagon to carry the wild man to the circus. There were cries of, and you can just imagine this, like, stand back, take care, mind yourself kind of thing. And when the doors of the wagon were opened, there was the wild man fastened with chains, held by his attendants. He immediately went wild, roaring, prancing, fighting with his handlers, trying to get at the onlookers. The station was cleared in no time, and it wasn't a case of women and children first. The stunt was a great success, but when they came to wash the dye off, it was impossible. Scrub as they might, to the genuine roars of the wild man, they could not remove it. I understand it took several weeks before it finally was cleared. So you can see the promoters at that time, and the marketeers were, they'd put Eddie Hearn to shame. You know what I mean? They were well able to promote things. You know what I mean, etc. I was just going to talk about maybe just one aspect here of. Well, here's a description from the same man of just one of the circuses that came in. It was a German one, I think. August 30th, 1948. Just some of the acts that were in it. Jesuit Circus. This is now in a very rural area of Limerick. The Paul Selish Troop motorcycle act from Germany. Lucille, Queen of the Air. Simba, Baby Elephant. Courier, Skill with 7 horses. Alia and Nico from Romania. Continental Clowns. 3 Hesters. Trampoline act. Bob Worth, who was a juggler. hAodha and her Wonder Zebra. Liberty Ponies, presented by Roberto Mandina. Grace on the silver thread or on the wire. The Liborinis, continental bareback riders, and the 3 Willings, French knockabout acrobats. The Alva sisters, who were wire walkers, and a lady line trainer with 5 lines. The 8th Douglas Stringboard Act. So just to mention, say, about, the way in England, say, they call St. Stephen's Day Boxing Day. And I suppose that was both a religious festival and also it was a day off for people, from work. One of the few days off they got every year. But one of the reasons it was called Boxing Day was because there used to be the circus and the travelling booths and travelling shows, etc. And there would be boxing at the shows. And one aspect of it, which hasn't been kind of researched at all as of yet, say, is the boxing booths really, and also the role of women in the boxing booths. I believe that, say, Katie Taylor, like her family came over with, the Tailors are well known for being involved with travelling and show people and fairs for centuries. They came over to Bray originally, the amusements and the fair there, and the father stayed there then, do you know what I mean? And so she actually, whether her immediate ancestors were boxers, I don't know, but she certainly comes out of that tradition. So among the most dramatic and energetic attractions found on the travelling fairgrounds of Britain and Ireland were the boxing booths. These booths became especially popular during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and were closely tied to working class entertainment culture, travelling show traditions, and the rise of professional prize fighting. Usually built as raised wooden platforms or tented areas, boxing booths were operated by travelling showmen who moved from fair to fair throughout the season. Outside the booth, the spielers, or showmen, loudly challenged local men to enter the ring and attempt to last a round against trained fighters for prize money. Boxing booths travelled to many of the major fairs of Britain and Ireland, including Nottingham Goose Fair, Hull Fair, Doncaster Fair, and seasonal feast fairs throughout industrial towns in England, Scotland and Ireland. In Ireland, boxing booths appeared at large horse and hiring fairs such as Ballinasloe Fair, Spancil Hill and Puck Fair in Kerry, and numerous regional market fairs as well. I suppose the boxing booth, even though not much has been said about it, it was also deeply connected with kind of entertainment culture, and it's no surprise that huge amounts, a very large amount of the best boxers in nowadays are of traveller background, Many booth fighters came from travelling show families or from communities accustomed to travelling shows or moving around. Some booths toured alongside circuses and travelling amusement companies, creating temporary entertainment districts within the fairground itself. Women's boxing on the fairgrounds has often been overlooked by sporting historians, yet women fighters did appear within travelling fair, circus rings and boxing booths from the late 19th century onwards. In Victorian Britain, female boxing exhibitions were frequently advertised as curiosities or novelties, though many of the women involved were actually highly skilled athletes. Some women fought each other professionally in booths and circus tents, while others participated in mixed exhibitions where they challenged male opponents or demonstrated sparring techniques before crowds. One of the most famous later figures associated with booth fighting was a woman called Barbara Buttrick. She was a Yorkshire-born boxer nicknamed the Mighty Atom. Before gaining international recognition in women's boxing, professional boxing during the 40s and 50s, now, gaining international, like she might have fought abroad, etc., but women's boxing wasn't very developed in terms of, TV or radio or anything at that stage, no more than women's soccer. Buttrick fought in travelling fairground booths and promotions where women boxers had to prove themselves before sceptical audiences. Earlier, women fighters were often attached to travelling circuses or boot families, though you have to go through newspapers and kind of and official sporting organisations, sporting organisations didn't take boxing seriously, but women's boxing, unfortunately. But oral histories from Britain and Ireland, both in English and Irish and Ireland, mention women participating in challenge fights, sparring exhibitions, and all-in wrestling and boxing shows connected to fairs and travelling amusements. Some husband and wife boxing acts toured together. Jeez, you'd want to behave yourself. I'd say if you complained about something, while female fighters were occasionally advertised as champions capable of defeating male challengers. Okay, another one around the fairgrounds, which you still see today. I'm just focusing on a few things now. You don't see boxing anymore in the booths, but another one that's still there on all the fairgrounds that you see and all the travelling fairs is the shooting galleries. And shooting galleries became increasingly popular during the late Victorian and Edwardian periods, partly because of growing public fascination with military skill and marksmanship throughout the British Empire. Decorated with flags, painted scenery, brass fittings, lights, and rows of prizes, the shooting gallery combined competition with spectacle and became one of the most recognisable features of the fairground. Their popularity, unsurprisingly, increased significantly after both the First and Second World Wars. Large numbers of returning soldiers already possessed good rifle skills, and shooting galleries offered a familiar and competitive pastime. So I suppose the fair, in a way, it's taken from every aspect of the local culture, at a particular time. So in that case, it's kind of military culture. Another one was, say, the coconut stalls, so knocked down using wooden balls thrown by players. The stall holder's voice, showmanship, he had to attract, or she had to attract people into the coconut stall with voice, wit, humour and persuasive skill. And during the 19th century, the coconut itself symbolised, in a way, exotic trade and empire for the British anyway, especially in rural Britain and Ireland, where imported tropical goods were rare and still carried a sense of novelty and mystery. Coconut shies therefore reflected the fairground's ability to transform ordinary games into colourful spectacles filled with performance and excitement. And I suppose another one, we won't go into it now because I've gone on too long, but the bioscope shows were they were the first films were shown on Fairgrounds as well, and by Showpeople, you know. There was a huge tragedy actually in Limerick, in rural Limerick, in a place called Drumcollar in the 1920s, where a travelling showman was showing a film, and say he was here, say, and the screen was over there, and say all the audience were here sitting and you were facing that way, and the sort of film was highly flammable. Do you know what I mean? Because it even had kind of gasoline nearly on it. Do you know what I mean? And I think about 14 or 15 people died, and that was a huge tragedy at the time in Ireland, you know. The films shown in the early bioscope theatres varied widely. Audiences watched short silent films, and some of these films went into, say, the first cinemas as well, and a lot of the show people got involved in cinema as well, you know, in particular places, particular towns, and they're still there today. So quite often the short silent films, I'm talking to my father, and he said, you know, he saw some of them when he was a small kid. Comic sketches, boxing fights, contests, royal processions, military parades, news events, news from Pathé or whatever, train journeys, you know, you could go in and watch a train journey, disasters, Western adventures, you know, cowboys and Indians, I suppose, melodramas, and scenes from foreign countries. And I suppose, and they also had what they called actuality films, which were just fact-based films, really, where somebody had got a camera and a short recording of something that was really happening. And these were especially popular because many people had never before seen moving images of distant places or major public occasions. You also had newsreel footage, which was, you know, heavily biased towards the British, I'm sure, from the Boer War and later the First World War, drew enormous crowds, allowing audiences to witness, events that were far away quite often, say from Ireland, but that were affecting people's lives in terms of rationing and everything, you know, and in terms of their animals not being worth anything, or the economic war, etc. I suppose bringing the world outside to here. I was going to talk about peep shows as well, but I think we'll leave that for another. We could get another good lecture out of that later on. But we might look at the thing there. Oh, jeez, sorry. Oh, yeah, sound. Thanks, Charles. I'm not sure how long this site is up, but I only discovered myself recently. But there's a lot of very good photographs of, which are probably better than the ones I had.
Do you know which one you want to go to?
Any of them really? Any of the families there?
McAsters, Farrells.
Maybe the Corneys there, yeah. Oh, actually, do they have any photographs? Oh, maybe not. Yeah, they're just. It's something to refer to, I suppose, in terms of, you know, if you want to get photographs of. It's a very good site, and it's only gone up fairly recently, I think. And it's very good on the travelling shows now, or the road shows, sorry, the theatrical reviews and the fit-ups, which I haven't. That'll be for another day. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Gerbola Circus, they're still on the go. They were only down in Limerick there recently. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they've been in Ireland, must be Italian background, a long way back. They've been in Ireland for at least 150 years or 200 years. Corvinio's is another circus that's been here a long time as well. And we've all heard of Fawcett's and Chipperfields and Duffy's. Yeah. Oh, better. Will I put in the... I don't know whether these will look good, but anyway. The Great Showman, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, would you believe it? I actually haven't seen that film myself now, to be honest. But there was a very good film done. It was a little bit stage Irishy. Aidan Quinn was in it, that Irish-American actor, who's a traveller background himself. I think he's from Chicago. But there was a film done there about maybe 15, 20 years ago, and it was kind of a bit of a romantic kind of a film where he comes in with a travelling show into Sorry, no. You probably won't be able to see these too well, but anyway. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, these are just some photos that I got off a friend of mine who had taken photographs in a village, and like these wouldn't be on any website now, but amazingly the photos were taken in 1930s, 1920s, even earlier, by someone who got their hands on a camera, which was very unusual at that time to, you know, for an ordinary person to kind of get their hands on a camera. Must have been someone who came back from America, maybe, you know. That's the Hannafords. Now, they were a family who went on to America and went on to be involved in film and Barnum and different things. They toured around Ireland for... Oh, is that it? Yeah. Thanks a million. That's Fawcett's there of Northern Ireland, early 1930s. John James Duffy Circus, 1959. So,
Which one did Charlie Chaplin perform? Was it Fawcett's or Duffy?
Do you know what?
Celebrated every year on the ring of Quay in Waterville.
In Waterville, in Kerry. That's right, he celebrated at a film festival down there, isn't he?
Because he was in the circus when he was very young, apparently.
Yeah.
He used to hold the
He had some connection with Waterville.
Fawcett's or Duffy's, one of the
Was it? Yeah. I know that he was, like a lot of show people, he was very very superstitious, Charlie Chaplin. And they tried to make a film called The Circus, I think, in Hollywood a number of times. And there was a fire at least twice. Something else happened another time. And he was kind of convinced in the end that it was haunted, you know, sort of thing. Now, eventually it did come out. No, I don't.
that either Fawcett's or Duffy's provided tent for the film festival.
Oh, okay. It's probably, yeah. It's probably one or the other, because the two of them have the biggest tents in Ireland anyway. So, this was a boy actually a young lad who took these photographs. You know, which are very good, really, when you think of it. They're like 1936. Like the only photographs I've seen, kind of from the early 20s, 30s. In Ireland are generally kind of anthropologically kind of type photographs of, what do you call it? I don't know why. I think there's nothing on that page, but there should be something further down. There was a priest, wasn't there, called Father Brown, who took a lot of interest in photographs. And there was also one or two kind of English anthropological, rich kind of Victorian types who took. So that's the advanced publicity van. A nice van now, in fairness. Ben Bono and Barrett's Radio Circus. There was a guy at school with me called Francis Barrett. He was the first traveller to fight for Ireland in the Olympics in kind of...
I think his granddaughter is the actress Liz Bono.
Really? Oh, from this family. Oh, that's interesting now. I didn't know that.
Would be his granddaughter.
Oh, okay.
Say she's in her 60s.
Yeah. You find that, don't you? You see the same names coming up. So that's Corvinio's 1937. And sorry, that on the other side is James Duffy and Son Circus in Connemara, 1954. Very kind of bare-looking ground there. Corvinio's is still going strong. And Duffy's obviously is as well. James Duffy and Sons on the road, 1953-54. Somebody obviously took a picture from on a height. There's some of the Duffys doing equestrian tricks on a horse. The very tall lad there. Sorry, yeah. Arthur, Tommy, and Billy Duffy. These are all belonging to a cousin of mine who kind of inherited them from someone else. So these are actually amazing. Like 1931, and you see Salt and Saucy were quite famous elephants around Europe at the time. And they're walking up through a small, which is still a very small village there, Capmore in East Limerick. And they're actually walking right past the door of where this man's family were from. But like it kind of sort of makes you question a little bit about, you know, the way that there's the whole thing of we weren't connected to the rest of the world, and, you know, we were kind of this backwater of, you know, gobshites kind of thing, you know. And you kind of realize, actually, you know, we were a lot more connected than people thought, you know, at that time. Wilson and Duffy Circus Company, 1917, they must have combined circus. The Fairground at Loan, that's still used for circuses, Duffy's and Fawcett's, etc. 1959. Wow, look at that one now. That's pretty amazing. That's on the road from Limerick out the country, like. Bobo the Clown, Bobby Fawcett and his brother John, 1950s. That's a man, he had a bar called the Circus Bar, and people used to stay in it. It's actually his grandson who owns a lot of these photographs. You know, a lot of the older circus people would stay in lodgings there, you know, like when it was very cold in the winter. And his field used to be used as a circus field, and some of his family took part in the circus as well, you know. Like with some of the traveling shows, you would have had, say, sometimes, say, the odd time, say, Protestant or Catholic clergy or both, you know, kind of complaining, you know, that the girls were sort of a bit scantily dressed or whatever, you know, dancing girls and all that kind of stuff. But actually, what tended to happen in rural Ireland anyway was the show people were kind of hoping that the clergy would say that. Do you know what I mean? Because it brought more people to the show, you know, so, or it brought return visits, you know. Scott Circus, yeah. So the kind of hats those people are wearing there are very, very old. Kind of, they go back to medieval times, you know. The knights they're from London, I think. No, just the style of, they're kind of gesture hats from kind of, you know, the one on the right, yeah, the ones on the right, you can barely see them now, but they're kind of nearly like a fez that somebody'd wear, you know, kind of in the Middle East. Yes, I think that's an amazing photograph. That's before the build-up, the tent spread out. That's in Connemara as well, 1954. So somebody took that, but that's it. Sinead, thanks a million. Thanks very much.